Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new. My name is Kristen, this is my booktube. So in today's video, we will be talking about all of the books that I read in June, and that means we're going to be talking about 5 books today. I did almost finish 2 additional ones, but I didn't quite make it there. So we have 5 to talk about today, and then those other rollover ones we will get to talk about in the next wrap-up video that I do. So to kick things off, we're going to start off by talking about the stats of the books that I read in June, and then once we're done talking about that, we'll move into talking about each individual book that I finished. Like I said, I did finish 5 books in the month of June, and here is a little pie chart of the moods of the different books that I read. Not a lot going on in this pie chart. I believe that I've said in some recent video that I have been reading a lot of mysteries and thrillers, and I'm trying to break that up a little bit, because I did find in June that some of those mysteries and thrillers were starting to blend together in my head a little bit. So we just want to make sure that we're reading multiple genres so that one particular genre doesn't start to feel stale. So yeah, as you can see from the little pie chart, we had 3 main moods of the books that I read in June, and those are tense, dark, and mysterious. And then up towards the top, you can see that I read a total of 790 pages and listened to 23.83 hours worth of books. As far as the pacing of the books that I read goes, 80% of the books that I read in June were medium paced and 20% were fast paced. The genres of the books that I read were mysteries, thrillers, crime, classics, short stories, science fiction, and horror. So once again, you can kind of see that a lot of the books that I read were in very similar genre categories. They did differ somewhat in different ways, but they were all tied together with that kind of thriller mystery vibe. So good call on my part to try to break these up a little bit, because I am starting to read every book like a thriller and I don't want to do that. So we're trying to rectify that situation as best that we can. And for the audiobooks specifically, 50% of the audiobooks that I listened to in June were under the 8-hour mark. 25% were over the 16-hour mark, and then the last 25% are right in between the 18 and 16-hour mark. Alrighty, and the last stats category is going to be the average star rating for the books that I read. And as you can see, I had 3 books that I rated 4 stars, 1 book that I rated 3.5, and 1 that I rated 3.25. And we will be going through each of these books, starting with the one that I rated the lowest and working our way up to the ones that I rated the highest. So the first book that I want to talk about that I finished in the month of June is the book that I rated the lowest at 3.25 stars, and that is Murder on the Mews and Other Stories by Agatha Christie. This was one of my audiobooks. I listened to it on a long road trip at the beginning of the month, and this is a collection of 4 short stories. The first one being Murder on the Mews, which you would expect from the title. And in this short story, we have an apparent suicide, or at least a death that is made to look like a suicide, on Guy Fawkes Night in the UK. If you're unfamiliar with what Guy Fawkes Night is, basically there was this guy and his group of friends in the 1600s who decided that they were going to blow up Parliament, and it was called the Gunpowder Plot, but people figured out it was going to happen. Word got back to the government officials. They foiled the plan, and now every year on, I believe it's the 5th of November, all over the UK, people light bonfires and set off fireworks to celebrate the Gunpowder Plot that did not blow up Parliament. There's a down and dirty, very quick, brief summary of Guy Fawkes Night for you. Not exhaustive. I would hope you wouldn't think that that is every single detail about Guy Fawkes Night that is pertinent, but for the purposes of this story, that is all you need to know. So basically, the fireworks from the Guy Fawkes Night festivities covers up the gunshot noise so that people living nearby the victim do not necessarily identify the gunshot apart from the fireworks that are already going off. And the victim is found by her roommate, and once Poirot is involved, he immediately spots that this suicide is a little bit fishy and determines that that from the looks of the crime scene and everything, that it looks like a murder that is staged to look like a suicide. And I'm not going to give away anything else in this short story, but that's the basic plot of Murder in the Mews. Then the next short story in this book is called The Incredible Theft. So this second short story deals with the theft of some top secret British airplane plans. Basically, there's this group of people over at a rising politician's house where they are discussing British air supremacy, which is wild to me just because this book came out in 1937. So like World War II hadn't really kicked off in full force yet. Like Poland still hadn't been invaded. Questionable as to what Japan was doing at this time, because I know they were doing stuff in 1937, but in any case, full-scale war had not broken out yet at this point, so I thought that this story was like so interesting to read. If you look at it through the interwar lens, where in the climate of when this book was published, they are right on the verge of the Second World War, and in this story specifically, they are talking about, you know, the military, British air supremacy, and talking about top secret military plans. I don't know. I just thought it was really cool. I'm a history nerd, so stuff like that, thinking about the context of the books that I read within the bigger conversation culturally that's going on at the time is always something interesting that I like to think about. And I just thought that that was really interesting. So the whole big conflict in this short story is trying to figure out who stole these top secret airplane blueprints. And that is what Poirot is called in to try to figure out. And he does. So yeah, that is the basic plot summary of The Incredible Theft. Then the third story in this collection of short stories is Dead Man's Mirror. And I believe that sometimes this short story collection is also sold under the name Dead Man's Mirror and Other Stories. This one has to do with a man who is shot and murdered, I believe in his study, somewhere in his house. And when he is shot, the bullet hits a mirror and makes it crack in a specific pattern. So there's a lot of conversation surrounding this mirror and the way that it cracked when the bullet hit it. If I had to summarize the story into like one word, it would probably be angles. Like that is a lot of conversation that happens in this book is trying to figure out the angles in which this bullet was going and how the gun would have had to be fired to create the murder scene in the way that Poirot found it. The interesting thing about this one is that Poirot is summoned before the murder even occurs. I believe that the victim had a suspicion about something potentially happening to him, and he sent Poirot a letter since it's 1937. It took him a little while to pull up to the house after the letter was sent, and when Poirot shows up, he finds that no one in the house was expecting his arrival. And then he starts to inquire after the person who wrote him the letter. And when they go to look for him, that's when they discover that he has been shot in his study. And then the investigation takes off from there. And the last short story in this collection is called Triangle at Rhodes. And this one takes place at a hotel. And this one is funny because it basically opens with Poirot being like, okay, I'm done. I'm supposed to be retired. I'm tired of dealing with crime when I'm not expecting it. I'm gonna go have a nice holiday at this hotel. And what happens when he gets there? Of course, crime follows this man everywhere he goes. So even when he goes on vacation and tries to have like a chill crime-free time, the crimes still find their way to him. And this story is no different. A lot of it takes place on a beach, from what I remember. And this is basically about a love triangle, but a deadly one. It's pretty simple in its construction. You know, you have people cheating on their spouses, there are love triangles forming. Add in a dash of murder, and that's basically what this story is. And I do like stories like this, where it's a little more of a low-key whodunit, because the ones where they're like a murder in a locked room and everyone in the house is a suspect is interesting, but I also really like seeing Poirot teasing out these relationships between the people in this story to figure out what is actually happening and what the motivations are behind the crimes being committed when there is so little physical evidence. So yeah, overall, I enjoyed all four of these stories, but I'm gonna be honest, they didn't particularly stick in my head. Like when I was reviewing the books that I read this month, I saw this one and I was like, I don't even know if I really remember enough of the plot of those short stories to be able to talk about them. So I have the Wikipedia page up so that I can refresh my memory of what the plot points were. And I feel like that's kind of how I felt when I initially finished it. I had a feeling that though they were fun in the moment and I enjoyed listening to them, they made my road trip go by significantly faster. They served their purpose. I knew that pretty much as soon as I was done with them and I started a new book that they were exiting my brain. So because of that, that generally will make a book fall into the 3-star range for me. But I did think that these specific short stories were very engaging and I was very entertained with them the whole time I was listening. So I decided to bump them up a little bit from a 3 and give it a 3.25. So yeah, that's why I rated those short stories at a 3.25. Okay, so that was the only book that I rated 3.25. So moving on to the next category, which is going to be the books that I rated 3.5 stars. And similarly, I only have one book in this category as well. So the book that I rated 3.5 stars in the month of June is Perfect, a thriller that'll grab you by your DNA. This was a book that I had seen just randomly on one of my audiobook subscription sites, and it just seemed like a very interesting thriller. The cover drew me in because, you know, it has a creepy looking house on the front. It's very dark. And then once I read the synopsis, I was very intrigued to read this book because it's unlike any other thriller that I think I've read before. And there are some things about this book that, like, I have some questions about, I'm not gonna lie. So Perfect is about this girl named Juliet, who is, when we first meet her, about 9 years old. And she lives in a house with her parents who are both scientists, but they're not regular scientists. Her parents are scientists that are trying to create the perfect child. Now, what does this mean? What does it mean to be a perfect child? Well, to Juliet's parents, that means never getting a bump, never getting a scrape, never getting a disease, never getting a zit, basically being blemish-free from head to toe, never getting a bruise, never getting a cut, because if any of those things were to happen to her, she would no longer be perfect. And if Juliet is not perfect, she is no longer of use to her parents because her parents are researchers and she is basically their science experiment. As Juliet grows older, she starts to realize that, you know, some of the things that her parents have told her about the outside world are not true, and she starts to plan her escape. And that's basically what most of this book is about. This book is about Juliet and her younger sister trying to escape from their parents and break out of what is essentially a mad science lab that is made to look like a normal suburban house. This is another audiobook that I listened to on a long road trip, and I rated it 3.5 stars because I did enjoy it most of the time. It did toe the line of like white supremacy and eugenics, but it didn't specifically say that. So like that kind of made me feel a little weird about it because, you know, there's a very, at least to me, there is a very thin line between gene coding to try to make people healthier and full-on eugenics. But I will give the author the benefit of the doubt, but my ethical concerns about this fictitious story are neither here nor there. So I'm just gonna take it at face value and just say that the people in this story are mad scientists that are just trying to cure childhood cancer. That's what they mostly talk about, but I'm just saying, I can see broader motivations behind wanting to create the perfect child. I'm just saying, it feels a little off, you know? But in any case, it was a really thrilling ride. I think in general, in both like TV or film mediums as well as book mediums, I really enjoy the adrenaline of a chase. So the whole part where they are running away from the Genesis Corporation and Juliet's parents and trying to evade capture, That part was so thrilling to me, and I really did enjoy that part. But there were other plot points that either fell flat for me or I just didn't really like for the directionality of the story. So in the end, I gave it 3.5 stars for those reasons. It does look like this is supposed to be a trilogy. I don't think I'm going to continue the trilogy. I think I'm just going to leave it at one and done for this series. But I did enjoy it for the most part, and I thought that the twists were pretty good. And it definitely had my heart racing and had me on the edge of my seat, so I can't ignore those things when I'm giving it a rating. So 3.5 stars it is. Alrighty, and the last rating category that we have to go through today is the 4-star category. So I had 3 different books that I rated 4 stars in the month of June, and these aren't in any particular order. I'm just gonna go through them in the order that they show up on my computer screen right now. And the first one is Cards on the Table by Agatha Christie. So this book is another Poirot mystery. That shouldn't be a surprise. Anyone that knows me knows that I am making my way through the Poirot series. So this is just another step in that progression, if you will. Now, Cards on the Table has a lot to do with the game Gin Rummy, I think. Is that what they play? Or do they play bridge? It might be bridge. It's some card game that I know people that play, but I have no idea how to play myself. Let me Google it and make sure that I'm not saying the wrong game. What game is it? Bridge. Okay, it's bridge. They're playing Go Fish. No. Okay, so Cards on the Table opens with Poirot going to an art exhibit, and then he meets this eccentric, he's just described as a collector. And of course, because Poirot is famous, the collector knows who he is and starts telling Poirot about how he is fascinated with crime. He tells him about this massive collection that he has at his house. He has like these really weird crime memorabilia things. Like I think he has like some supposed Jack the Ripper memorabilia or something like that. But also, being the eccentric and the extremist that he is, he doesn't only collect inanimate objects that are crime related. He bolsters to Poirot that he also collects a menagerie of criminals. He doesn't like physically keep them at his house. He basically is friends with criminals and then he has dinner parties with them, or at least that's what I remember happening. In any case, this collector wants to impress Poirot, so he invites him over to a dinner with his collection of criminals. Poirot agrees and he goes to this dinner. And he discovers that he is not the only crime professional that has been invited to this dinner. There are several other characters that are recurring Agatha Christie characters, and some of them have their own book series, but these are all recurring characters throughout Christie's novels, which I think is so fun. I love a recurring character. And so when I saw some of these names pop up, I got excited because I either recognize them from other books or I recognize the name because of other Agatha Christie stories that center around them. But the other 3 crime professionals that are present at this party, aside from Poirot, are Superintendent Battle, who has a couple books of his own in the Christie collection, Colonel Race, who likewise also has his own books in the Christie collection, and a mystery writer named Ariadne Oliver. And this is like one of my favorite little Agatha Christie fun facts. Ariadne Oliver is a self-caricature of Agatha Christie. She wrote that character based on herself. And I just think it's so funny because she's such a fun character. She's a very smart woman. I believe she's like in her 50s or so in this book, but she just loves apples. She talks about eating apples in the bathtub and how I think she like carries around her own apples or something like that. And she also has a foreign detective that she has created an entire series about. Her detective is Finnish, and it's just so funny because Agatha Christie works in her own frustrations with Poirot as a character and her writing process with him into this story and other stories that Ariadne shows up in. And I just think that's so fun, especially when you know that that is her own vision of who she is. In different points in this book, Ariadne Oliver talks about how, you know, she'll get details wrong in a book and then she receives floods of letters from either Finnish people telling her that like he doesn't act enough like a Finn, or people who take issue with the details of her story, saying like, you know, it doesn't make sense that, you know, this specific gun couldn't do what you said it did in this story or something like that. And Ariadne in the book just kind of like pokes fun at it and says like, you know, I'm not here to be factually accurate. I'm here to entertain. And like, I just love it. I think it's so fun. Especially now, like being that Agatha Christie is gone, I think it's so cool to be able to see a version of herself in her writing that is from her own point of view, even if it is a bit like exaggerated for dramatic effect or whatever. I just think it's so fun to see a little self-insert in a book like this. And that definitely upped the rating for me, I feel. But that has nothing to do with the actual plot of the story. So let's get back to the plot summary. So anyways, Ariadne's one of the crime professionals that's at this dinner party, and everyone else that is there is a criminal of some sort, or rather someone that their host thinks is a criminal. So the plan for the night, once all of the guests arrive, is that they are going to play bridge, and they have 2 tables set up in 2 different rooms. There is one table for the professionals and people that are good at playing bridge, and then there is another table in another room that is for the more novice players. And interestingly enough, the host doesn't seem to want to play. He spends most of the night sitting in a chair next to the fire in one of the rooms. I think it's the professional room, but I could be wrong. So the night wears on, people play their games, get to know each other a little bit, and then once the party starts to break up and people start to, you know, finish up their games, things like that, it comes to light that what people think is their host dozing by the fire is actually their host's dead body. Someone at some point in the evening had come up and stabbed him in the chest without anyone else knowing and murdered him. And from that point, it is up to our 4 crime professionals to figure out what happened to their host. Keep in mind, there are 4 people that the host thought were murderers also in the house. So there's not really an obvious culprit that just stands out right off the bat. And another thing that I think is really funny about this book is that because there are 4 crime professionals, they all want to be involved with the investigation and they all want to interview the guests. So instead of them all asking the same exact questions, Poirot takes it upon himself to kind of think outside the box. And while Colonel Race and Superintendent Battle are asking people more pointed and direct questions that obviously have to do with the murder that just occurred, Poirot is asking them, what do you think of this person's bridge game? Like, how do you think of them as a player? And he asks literally everyone that question. And after he asks probably about 4 or 5 people, either Race or Battle asks him, like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you so concerned about these people's bridge game? And Poirot reveals that you can tell a lot from someone by the way that they play bridge, whether they play conservatively, take risks, and he claims that he can even tell when someone is distracted by, say, I don't know, committing a murder, based on how they play their bridge game. And this is something common in Poirot stories where he latches on to a specific detail that seems innocuous, seems like something that wouldn't really affect the case as a whole, but it turns out that it is actually a linchpin in Poirot figuring out not only who committed the crime, but their motives for doing so. And this one isn't that much different. The interviews about how people play bridge definitely does play a role in Poirot's big reveal of the sequence of events at the end of the book as well. So yeah, that's pretty much all I'm gonna say for the plot because I don't want to give anything else away. But this one was really interesting. I thought it was a lot of fun to work, you know, like an innocent card game into this murder mystery, especially when the people playing the card games are 4 suspected murderers and 4 crime professionals. It's just an interesting dynamic. And to have the host that's tying them all together be the victim of the murder, I feel like just adds to the mystery because he's the connecting factor between all of them. And without him there, it's pretty much just a group of strangers with a dead body in a room, and they're having to figure out who the murderer is. So yeah, I thought this book was so fun. I really enjoyed it. I was engaged throughout the entire thing. Again, this is another one that I listened to on my road trip, this time on the way back. The twists and the turns in this book are really good. I always love the big reveal at the end where Poirot, you know, summons everyone into one room, sits them down and explains exactly how everything happened. And, you know, I have to give it a high score just because I love the self-insert so much. Ariadne Oliver is such a character in the best way, and I just love seeing little bits of Agatha Christie's personality shine through in that specific way. So I gave this one a 4 out of 5 in the end. I feel like maybe I would have given it a higher score if I knew literally anything about bridge. But alas, I don't know how to play bridge. So 4 stars is where we're staying with this one. Alrighty, and the next book that I rated 4 stars in June was The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. So as I've said before, I have read several Riley Sager books before, and I have enjoyed each and every one of them. I believe this is my 3rd Riley Sager book, and this one was definitely different in a good way, I'd say. I feel like I either said in a video or I said it out loud, or maybe I just thought it. Who's to say? But I had a thought recently about Riley Sager specifically, and I was thinking about how the 2 books that I've read from him have both been very similar. And I was afraid that Riley Sager's books were going to be pretty formulaic, where it's basically the same story, just repackaged a little bit differently. And I feel like he heard that thought and said, hold my beer, we're gonna switch it up. Because The House Across the Lake, very different. Very different twist-wise, and different in a good way, I would say. I feel like there has been a common theme in the other 2 Riley Sager books that I have read of all of the scary things that are happening, the eerie, unsettling things that are happening in these books have a logical explanation in the end. So by the 2nd Riley Sager book that I read, I wasn't really that creeped out about the things that were happening to the main character, because in my head, I had the notion that Riley Sager doesn't really do paranormal thrillers. I was wrong, okay? Because The House Across the Lake is a paranormal thriller. So The House Across the Lake centers on our main character, whose name is Casey Fletcher. And Casey is she is a Nepo baby. She's kind of like a Liza Minnelli type, where her mom is this big Hollywood star, and Casey is too. She's a great actress in her own right, and she is very talented, has been in movies that people have seen. She talks about how she gets recognized on the street and stuff, and she's also struggling with alcoholism. And at the beginning of the book, she is a full-blown alcoholic. She drinks the entire day, and that is the source of what will become a semi-unreliable narrator. She's not a completely unreliable narrator, because she does still retain a lot of her consciousness, retain a lot of her memories of things that happen. She's not hallucinating or anything like that, really, for most of the book at least. She's very aware of what's going on around her. I feel like there are moments where Casey is questioning her sanity, but I didn't really find myself questioning Casey's sanity. I more so was focused on the people around Casey and who was trustworthy around her, because that was where my main suspicions lied. I never really thought that Casey was hallucinating or, blacking out and dreaming things. I never really thought any of that. But even so, she is definitely an unreliable narrator at certain points in time. The reason why Casey is an alcoholic is because she tragically lost her husband, I believe about a year before the book takes place. Prior to her husband's death, they had talked about moving full-time to this lake house that Casey's family has owned for generations. And that is where her and her husband Len were living at the time of his death. He ended up drowning in the lake. Casey is still living at this lake house, and she is essentially drinking her pain away. And one day, Casey notices that there is a body floating in the middle of the lake. So she gets in her boat and she goes out into the middle of the lake and pulls this drowned woman out of the body of water and resuscitates her. And once she is resuscitated and Casey gets a blanket around her and gets her back to shore, she realizes that not only does she know who this woman is, but most of the country knows who this woman is. She is a very, very famous supermodel, or retired supermodel, I should say. She's not modeling anymore, but gosh, she's pretty. And she had been going for a swim in the lake, and then something happened and she ended up almost drowning before Casey was able to bring her back to life. So Casey gets her stabilized, takes her back over to her house, which is the house across the lake, and, drops her off, makes sure that she's okay, tells Catherine's husband what's happening, and then they part ways. Later that same day, to say thank you, Catherine and her husband, Tom, show up to Casey's house and bring a very expensive bottle of wine, which Casey is all too happy to drink multiple glasses of. And they start to get to know each other. And Casey and Catherine become friends fairly quickly. And now that Casey is aware that someone is living in the house across the lake, she becomes almost hyper fixated on them. It starts with her sitting on her back porch and just kind of, glancing out across the lake, and with Catherine's house being directly across, and basically the entire back of her house being glass. At night, it's like looking into a fishbowl. She can see everything that they're doing, including all of the fights that they have. And Casey is immediately drawn in to watching Catherine and Tom. And she starts to notice that their marriage doesn't look as picture perfect as they portray it to be. And Casey starts to get the idea that maybe Catherine is in more danger now than she was when she was swimming in the lake. And this entire book is basically about Casey knowing that something is going on in the house across the lake and trying to do her best to stop it. And this book was a really fun one to read. I really enjoy the way Riley Sager does a thriller, especially now that I know that it's not just, copy and paste formulaic kind of stuff. Now that I've read a book that's different from the other two, I'm excited to get to read more of his books. I have at least 2 more on my bookshelf in my room of his that I would like to get to read at some point in the near future. But yeah, this one was so interesting. I loved the setting of, I believe it's like Vermont or New Hampshire, somewhere in the Northeast like that. I loved that like small town woodsy setting. It's such an isolated area because they are at a lake in the woods in like remote Vermont or something like that. So the only people that are close to Casey are the people in these like 5 houses around this lake. And only 4 of the houses are occupied. And there's only really 1 person out of all of these people that Casey knows that she can trust. It's just a really good setting for a thriller like this because it's isolated without you really realizing how isolated it is until shit hits the fan. I thought that it was such a good thriller. It was so twisty and turny. I will say that like there are parts in the ending that I was like, I don't know if I like how that went. So that's why I bumped it down to a 4, just because I don't think it was perfect by any means. And I do think that Lock Every Door specifically had me on the edge of my seat a bit more than this one did. So yeah, that's why I ended up giving that one a 4, but it's still like a really good thriller. I would be interested to hear the audiobook for it. And it also opens with a quote from No Body, No Crime by Taylor Swift. I mean, I have to stand an author that's a Swiftie, right? I feel like it's a rule. Alrighty, and the last book that I wanted to talk about in this June wrap up, and I need to do it quickly because I've been talking for far too long. But the last book that I want to talk about is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. So this is a book that is very near and dear to my heart. I think that this is one of the most creative thrillers that I've ever read, and I've recommended it to a lot of people. But I'm coming to realize that this is a book that probably won't work for a lot of people. And the thing about this book in particular is that it is confusing until like the last 5 or 6 chapters, maybe the last 10 chapters, if I'm being generous. It's confusing, and it's supposed to be confusing, and I feel like that's something that a lot of people aren't comfortable with in a book. And I have heard other people say that like maybe if it got turned into a movie, I would like it more. And I think it was supposed to be turned into a show by Netflix or something like that, and then it got scrapped because of the pandemic. But I do agree that I think that this book would make a great TV show or movie, but I think that the book is so good. So The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle centers around, as you would expect, the death of Evelyn Hardcastle and our main character, who is trying to figure out who kills Evelyn. Our main character is essentially trapped inside of a perpetual time loop on the day that Evelyn dies. The main character knows basically nothing when they first wake up. They wake up in the body of a doctor named Sebastian Bell in the middle of the woods, and they don't know what's going on. I believe they hear a gunshot and a woman scream, and they're freaked out, rightfully so, when you have no memories and you wake up in the woods to something like that. So the main character eventually makes his way back to the manor, Blackheath, and into the house where people greet him and they're concerned about him, and they think that he has amnesia or some sort of short memory loss. And so does our main character for a while. So our main character goes through his first day being like, this is really weird. I don't remember being Dr. Sebastian Bell. I don't know who any of these people are. I don't remember why I'm here. And it's basically him just trying to get his bearings and figure out what is going on. It is not until the end of that day and our main character wakes up the next day that they start to realize that they are in a time loop. Not only are they in a time loop, but they're jumping from body to body of the different people that are attending this party at Blackheath. As time goes on, our main character figures out that they are there for a reason. They have, I believe it's 8 days to live as different people within the Blackheath house to try to figure out who murders Evelyn at 11 p.m. at this party. And the catch is, after the 8 days, our main character starts back over in the first body, Dr. Sebastian Bell, and then has to do it all again. They lose all of their memories from the previous cycle, which is why our main character didn't know what was going on at the beginning of the book. And then they have to go through it all again and again and again until they can speak out loud who the murderer of Evelyn Hardcastle is. And that is the only way to escape the time loop. Now, everyone at this party is very different. The first person our main character inhabits is a doctor. There is also a very old and very gluttonous banker that our main character inhabits. There are scoundrel playboys. There are police officers. There's a whole array of people at this gathering. And as the story goes on, we start to realize that there is so much more going on at Blackheath than just one person who wants to kill Evelyn. And it is a very twisty and turny ride. I have tried to explain the ending to several people, and it has taken me a very long time to do so each and every time because there are so many loose ends that get tied up at the very end of this book. And I don't even know if I can go into any more of a plot summary than that without this video being like over an hour long. But if that is something that you're interested in, I could potentially make a video explaining the whole ending of this book because it is 400 pages to lead up to this insane twisty ending. And I just think that it is such a genius way to weave everything together that I could totally fangirl over it and just explain to you exactly what is going on inside of Blackheath, if anyone is interested. But yeah, I really love this book. This is the second time that I've read it, and I have noticed on Goodreads that it doesn't have the best reviews, but I honestly think that is mostly because of the style of this book, because it is very reminiscent of an Agatha Christie book where you do not know what is happening until the big reveal at the very end of the book. And I just don't think that's how thrillers are made nowadays. So unless you are into that kind of whodunit murder mystery, I can totally see people not vibing with this book. And I don't blame anyone that doesn't vibe with it. I am just such a lover of Agatha Christie that seeing that kind of whodunit style put on top of this really interesting concept of what I call a Groundhog Day murder mystery is just so cool. And I am just so blown away by this book every time that I read it or I think about all of the details and the meticulous planning that had to go into writing this book. I just don't think that this author gets enough credit for how good this book is, but that's just my opinion. You know, I love books that other people hate and people love books that I hate, so there's no obligation to read or like this book. I just have a soft spot in my heart for it. Yeah, so I ended up giving it a 4-star because there are some things about the plot of this book that I'm not 100% sold on, but I do still really appreciate the book for what it is. I think the writing is spectacular. I think that the intricacies of the plot and all of the moving pieces that have to line up for a book like this to work the way that it does is so impressive. That's why I sing the praises of this book, even though I only gave it a 4. You'd think by the way I'm talking about it that I gave it a 5-star, but the 4 is a reflection of both the content of the book and the style of the book as well. So overall it gets a 4, but stylistically, conceptually, I would give it a 5. So that is the end of my June wrap up. I've been yapping for almost an hour and a half, so this looks like it's going to be a pretty long video. I know I had a lot to say today, so I appreciate you watching to this point. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you should go ahead and leave a like down below. Let me know. You should also subscribe while you're down there because I put out new videos every single weekend. I hope you guys have a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!